Born in the USSR, Part 6, The War. Hello comrades, and welcome back to the Ushanka Show. As I mentioned before, as a kid I spent every summer in the village with my grandparents. And although I was the third grandkid, because my uncle Mikhail had two kids, my cousins Alex and Tanya, I became the favorite grandkid of Grandpa Sergey. And I'm not sure why, but he really loved me. I went fishing with him, I helped him to cut firewood, and I even was a good helper while quietly making a moonshine. But my favorite thing was to listen to his stories about the war in the evenings when it was dark outside and we were in the house having a dinner. I made him repeat those stories over and over and again, and probably that's why I still remember them. My grandpa was drafted to the army right after the World War II started. Well, actually, World War II started in September of 1939 when Germany attacked Poland, but the war for the Russians, for the Soviet people, started on June 22nd when Germany attacked Soviet Union. So my grandpa got drafted as many other men of their village, and they marched to the front to fight Germans. I remember Grandpa's story about German sniper when one day during the march they suddenly noticed that soldiers were tripping and falling to the ground with no particular reason, since there were no shots heard, and it took a while to realize that they were under snipers' fire, who were hidden in nearby woods and taking them down one by one. So after a while they managed to sneak on him from behind and kill him and watch him stumble down from the tall tree. Another time they were bombed kind of unusual way from the German bombers. They were still moving towards the front when suddenly several bombers were flying right above them, super low. Those were German bombers, and it looks like they were out of the bombs because one of the planes came back and flight super low, and all the soldiers, of course, scattered around trying to hide in the ditches or under the trees. And there was a German pilot standing at the open bomb bay, and he was just throwing grenades at the people on the ground, and two guys who were hiding on the tall tree ended up being killed that way. After several months at the front lines, my grandpa became seasoned soldier, we'll put it that way, and he was always careful and smart, so he would never risk his life for no reason. And I remember telling him how every day they will have some new arrivals, new recruits arriving to the front lines, to the trenches, and in the morning there'll be another pointless attack running towards German lines just to be mowed down by the German machine gunnists. And I remember Grandpa saying how the new guys will be all excited and can't wait to attack Germans and wipe them out. And in the morning, right before the attack, Soviet commissars will bring vodka, and everyone will get a shot of vodka, like 100 grams. That was a standard portion of vodka to help soldiers to get brave, and then screaming "Ura!" and for the comrade Stalin, za Stalina, they will start running towards the German lines, and my grandpa and the other experienced soldiers will take their time and kind of slowly go behind. And of course, without artillery support and tank support, those attacks were totally pointless, just a waste of life of Soviet soldiers. As you know from the history, war didn't go really well for the Soviet Union in the first especially in the first summer months in the fall of 1941. So my grandpa, his war didn't last long either. Around October or September of 1941, he got captured. In fact, his commander, and I'm not sure how big was his military unit, maybe the whole division, but they were surrounded, had no ammunition, no food, and their officer just decided, hey, there's no reason we cannot fight anymore because we have no bullets, we have nothing to eat. So they just marched towards the German lines and gave up the whole military unit, which according to Comrade Stalin was they all were traitors, because they weren't supposed to just give up like that. They should fight to the last bullet and then blew themselves up with a grenade or killed themselves, but you never give up. So this is how my grandpa became a prisoner of war. He ended up being transferred to Smolensk, Russian city west of Moscow, and he worked there in October, November, if I remember correctly, of 1941, and it was a labor camp for Soviet POWs. Along with him, his brother also got captured. They were together in a military union, so they both got captured, both became prisoners of war. Conditions were quite horrible. They worked on cleaning the rubble and doing repairs in Smolensk, which was destroyed pretty bad during the attacks, and they were getting hardly any food, and it was getting late in the season, it was getting colder and colder, and my grandpa realized that they're not going to make it through the winter in such conditions, so they decided to try to escape. My guess, they weren't guarded really well, because escape went pretty easy. Just one day on the way back to the camp, they're walking on the streets and they picked a good spot when the whole column was turning left or right, so there were no guards in sight, and they darted at that moment to the side street and hid under the rubble, waited till the column passed by, and then they started their long hike south, back to Ukraine, back to their home village. I'm not sure how long it took them to get home. I would guess a couple of weeks of walks, mostly at night. But I remember that they had to hide in the woods or hide in the piles of hay or straw that the peasants stacked for the winter, and sometimes they would just in desperation knock on the doors in the villages and beg for shelter to stay overnight, to stay warm. One time some old lady was nice enough to let them actually stay in her house, and they were really cold from walking in the woods, so she let them sleep on her wood burning stove. And I'm not sure if you know about it, but in every village, every house had, in Russia and Ukraine and Belarus the same, they had this big wood burning brick stove, so-called pech, that had an area on the top that you can lay and sleep, and that's where the peasants sleep in the winter when it's really cold. They burn the wood inside of the stove or oven, and it heats up bricks really well. Then the bricks are hot for several days, so you can sleep and stay warm even if your house is cold. And also that place used for drying different fruits and vegetables. So the lady let them sleep on that brick stove, which was very nice of her, and so they could warm up their bones. And I remember the grandpa said that after they got all comfortable, they were falling asleep, and they suddenly felt that there's something crunchy laying there in the bag. And of course they were starving, but they didn't want to ask old lady, push their luck and ask for some food. So they thought she stored some dry apples or dried pears in that bag, and they decided to eat it. They said it tasted really good. It wasn't apple, but it was something nice, dry, um, and crunchy, so they ate a whole bunch of it. And in the morning, when it became lighter and you could see things, to their horror, they realized that lady was drying up frogs, and that bag was full of dried frogs. And he said they were puking their guts out really bad after that. After they finally made back to the village, which is northern Ukraine, close to the border where Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia get together, there's a point where all three countries have a common border. They were hiding in meadows in the river because they had some like small woods and bushes till they trying to figure out that it looked like pretty safe to go back to the village. Germans already occupied that part of Ukraine at that time, but they only had a couple local police people, which they hired a couple locals to perform police duties. And those guys said, yeah, you find a lot of people coming back, and Germans don't care about it. So for a while, life was normal. They got lucky, they survived, and then the horrible thing happened. I'm not sure exactly how that happened. I don't remember details, but there was a long column of prisoners of war walking through the village, and my grandpa, instead of just hiding in the house, he decided to come out and check it out, watch the Soviet soldiers walking by. So he was standing on the street next to his house watching POWs, and suddenly there was a German soldier sentry walking along, and he noticed my grandpa, and he's like, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be in a column. He just snatched my grandpa, pushed him in the column, and this is how my grandpa ended up in Germany, where he spent the rest of the war till 1945. So once again, my grandpa was in a labor camp, in POW camp, but this time in Germany, possibly somewhere around Leipzig area. And he had to do all kind of different type of jobs. I remember his stories about working in a munition factory and doing all kind of other work, hard work, with no pay, of course, just a little food. But interestingly, according to him, Germans treated POWs from Ukraine way better than Russian POWs. So soldiers who were originally from Russia were treated way worse than soldiers from Ukraine. And I'm not sure for how long he had to stay in that labor camp, but later in the war, when Germans started having a real shortage of workforce because they were keep on drafting their own people to army, there were several farmers, German farmers, looking for help, and they were looking for people who had skills to be a farmer, like you can work with horses and stuff like that, and they preferred Ukrainians. So when one of the farmers found out that my grandpa was a blacksmith, that he could take care of the horseshoes and install them and do other things, that he was a farmer himself, that's how he got the job at the farm and moved to that farm where he spent the rest of the war. Interestingly, even after spending about 4 years as a POW in Germany, my grandpa never said anything bad about Germans. Actually, he had quite a lot of respect for them. I remember he was saying that he was very surprised to find out that they didn't lock their stores and shops. They were all, even they closed, they just doors closed, but there were no lock on it. But if you steal anything and they'll catch you, they will shoot you, no question asked. So they said they were strict, but they were fair. And one time, some store got robbed and Romanians, POW, did it. I don't know, he said Romanians, but I'm remembering that Romanians were allies of Germany, but what I remember, he said Romanians did it, but they blamed Ukrainians. They said that Ukrainian guys robbed the shop. So my grandpa ended up in Gestapo, being interrogated and tortured. They were hitting him in his temple with the hand, was that part of the gun that you hold with your hand, can't think of that word, hitting him all the time in the temple, demanding to tell who did the robbery. And of course, from those hits, from those impacts, he was losing conscious, and for the rest of his life he couldn't hear well to his left ear, because that's where he got hit, in the left temple all the time. But after a while, Germans found out who really did it, and they shot all those guys, and they let my grandpa free. He was free to go back to the farm, not back to the Soviet Union. Many years later, my mom, because my grandpa passed away at that time, told me that actually there was like the small family secret or something, that actually German farmer really liked my grandpa. And in fact, we have a photo which was taken in Germany, in Leipzig, in 1944. And it's my picture of my grandpa in tie and a suit, which is totally unusual for a Ukrainian person to have that, Ukrainian peasant, and especially if you are POW in Germany at that time. But my mom suggested something that, besides the fact that farmer really liked him, farmer's daughter also almost like fell in love with my grandpa, and I guess they were just we're talking about marriage, but my grandpa was married at the time and already had a kid back in Ukraine. So I'm not sure if there was some romance going on. Unfortunately, there's no way I can confirm or deny it, but as the fact, he actually had a pretty good life at that farm. He helped to make sausages and smoked and cured meats. Of course, if you do that kind of work, you always have enough snacks and foods to eat. So he was doing really well for being a POW in Germany. But then, in 1945, Americans came. And according to my grandpa, they gave all the POWs a choice. They could go to United States after staying, in American camps to be kind of checked out, make sure they were Nazis or anything like that, or spies, and then they had opportunity to move to the United States to start a brand new life, or they could go back to the Soviet Union. And my grandpa, he didn't want to leave his family behind, his wife, my grandpa Maria, and his little son Mikhail. So he decided to go back to the Stalin. And he actually managed to take some things with him. He brought a German bicycle and a couple other things, because I remember even in late 70s, early 80s, we still had that bike, although it had already like flat tires. He had a German knife, a bunch of German silverware, nice German hair clippers, stuff like that. So he managed to ship that stuff back home to his village, but then the horrible thing happened. If you remember, I mentioned earlier that Stalin said that you cannot give up. Actually, Stalin announced that we don't have prisoners of war, we have traitors. And the same applied to Germans. And there's a story then when the Stalin's son got captured during World War II. Stalin refused to swap him for general, because he said, I don't swap generals for privates. And also he said, we don't have prisoners of war, we have traitors. So because my grandpa was prisoner of war in Germany, instead of going back to his village and start his life all over again. He was sent to the labor camp in Donetsk region, which is more like eastern Ukraine, and there he started working in a labor camp rebuilding destroyed coal mines. So he did pretty good in German camps, but he almost died in a Soviet labor camp. They were starved and they were worked to death, and they were so desperate to get any food, which was quite, there was a lot of hunger going on, and hungry people in after war Ukraine, because the whole country was in a rubble. And one time, I remember this story really well. Him and a couple of his friends pulled whatever money they had, and they bought some meat on the local market, and they cooked it, and they said the meat was they thought it was a dog's because it didn't look and didn't taste like pork or even a horse or cow or beef. It had a weird sweet flavor, but they were starving, so they were happy to eat whatever. So they were having this meal and all excited, and suddenly my grandpa tasted something hard in his mouth. He thought it was a bone, so he pulled it out and he saw there was a human nail. So they realized they were eating human flesh, and so they ended up puking all over the place, and that's how that sweet meal party was over. They actually purchased human flesh on that market. And my grandpa mentioned many times that he wouldn't make it in that camp. He was like on his last leg. But fortunately, when grandma learned about his horrible situation, she went to their collective farm leader, председатель колхоза, and begged him, cried, and explained that her husband was in a labor camp and half dead. So she managed to get a signed letter that our collective farm desperately needs workers, and because of the qualifications of my grandpa, because he was a blacksmith and he could fix horseshoes and horses and other things, that kolkhoz really was in dire need of him. And she took that paper and she traveled to that labor camp, and she managed to get her husband out of it. And he said my grandpa Sergey was in pathetic shape. He was very skinny, like walking skeleton. He had fleas. He was unwashed and half dead. So that's how she brought him back from the Soviet labor camp, and that's how they finally World War II ended for my grandpa. Okay, so this was the part 6 of my story, Born in the USSR. I hope you enjoyed it, and as always, thank you for your support. Appreciate your likes, and if you really like my show, you can always make a little donation. You can click on the button donate on the front page of this website, or you can click on the link below this video. I sign up for the website at patreon.com, when you can provide support for your favorite YouTube programs. Thank you very much again. Большое спасибо. До свидания. Goodbye.